Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the New Year, New Me digital event, episode 4, and the last in our series of this series of celebrating wellbeing in the new year. It's hosted by CMI Cymru Board. My name is Kath Austin, and I'm the chair of CMI Cymru. I'll shortly be handing over to our fantastic panel today, Alana and Simon from Sarsen and Patrick from Cooth. If you've got any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A session. And as today is the final session, we've also collected questions that we've had along the way. So we'll have a nice, good chance to cover any questions that you have across any of our sessions at the second half of today's event. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers today, Alana, Simon, and Patrick. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Brilliant. So I think, Alana, you're going to start as we've created a new tradition and healthy habit with a grounding exercise. So I'll hand to you.
Oh, thank you, Kath. And hi, everybody, and welcome, whatever time of day you're in this moment. So wherever you are, we're going to do a little grounding exercise. And the idea of this is just to settle into this moment and just be with one another in this space. We're going to do something called box breathing. And this is one of my favorite practices. If you've done it before, wonderful. Do it again. If you've never done it before, it's one of my favorite because it's so easy. So it's called box breathing. So actually looking at the screen in front of you, you can see a box. And it works like this. So you'll take an inhale and a hold, an exhale and a hold. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. I will do all of the counting. You just need to do the breathing. So wherever you are, however that your day's been, whatever's going on in your world and the world, this is just a moment for you to sit entirely with yourself and arrive to this moment together. So however you're sitting, just get comfortable in your own body and just to give yourself this moment to settle. So you can close your eyes or rest your eyes. And before we start, just take a few really beautiful deep breaths in and out. And just let yourself settle and connect to yourself just for a moment. And then when you're ready, you can just take a really lovely deep breath in and sigh it all out. And we're going to start with an inhale of 4. So inhaling for 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Inhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Exhale 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Inhale. Just fill it all up, all the way up. And sigh it all out. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back to this room. And that's just an amazing tool that you can use at any time, at any moment. It's a fantastic way to settle your nervous system. So when you're feeling stressed, if you can't sleep, if you're about to give a presentation, if you're feeling anxious for any reason, it's this kind of magic tool to immediately settle your nervous system. And it's called box breathing. And it's yours and it's free. And you just use it anytime. And we're going to kind of transition from there. So however relaxed you are, you can just stay seated, and we're going to actually just kick off today's session with watching a really lovely short-minute video. And it's by a man called Mac McCartney, and he's one of my favorite teachers and speakers and inspirations. And it's a 5-minute video called How Powerful We Are. And it's a way to kick off the session with everything that's going on. Just to remember the potency of us as individuals. And his work really is about inspiring and encouraging the potency of each of us and our leadership capacity. So as you arrive into the space, take a moment just to keep settling in and watch Mac McCartney, and we'll see you on the other side. Enjoy.
We have no idea how powerful we are. Every time we make a phone call, we communicate online, we go to a shop, interact with others, we hold the power to influence the lives of others. It's a choice. And we need to make a choice that's based around generosity, around appreciation, and to understand that behind the facade almost everybody has a rather insecure sense of who they are and their value in this world. I think it's something which universally is shared. Some of us mask it rather better than others, and others live in a fantasy of their greatness, let's say, but it's still founded on something rather soft and insecure. So I think it's as simple as the choice I make in my interaction with the person serving food at the cafe or restaurant I'm at. The choice that I make how I phrase and send that email, being direct and true and real, and yet understanding that somebody else at the other end of this. The choice I make on social media, the choice that I make in every single tiny little moment. If only we could understand the vast impact of this and how it ramifies its way out and beyond, far greater than we perhaps understand. Who is it that doesn't remember some teacher or other who said something to us when we were little, and now, decades later, we still remember it? We are all teachers to each other. We are all in that place, and we can choose whether that is a force for good or a force to weaken and undermine others. We need to make the former choice.
Brilliant. Well, for the eagle-eyed of you see that I've changed locations during that film due to a bit of a dodgy internet, so sorry about that. But before we sort of get into our questions, there's a great opportunity to learn a little bit more about our speakers today. So, Alana, thank you very much for that grounding exercise, and thank you. You're our guest this week, so it'd be lovely to start with and give us a bit more background about what brought you here today and why you're passionate about well-being and developing consciousness.
Thank you, Kath. For those of you who know Jess, to be called the Jess for this week is a great honor. Big Jess fan. So for me, I was a young entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur, and always interested in kind of being very engaged in the world. And I came across kind of leadership at a very young age. And I actually burnt out 3 times through my 20s and my early 30s. Because I was so wanting to do work in the world. And it was only really in my early 30s that I came across well-being as a way of being, as like an actual pathway itself. And I had to, it was quite a painful journey to really kind of embrace well-being as a pathway. And so well-being has become a great love and passion for me, really helping people find their own, and what that means to them. So that's what brings me here today, as well as getting the great privilege of getting to work with Simon and Sarsen, which he'll tell you more about.
Well, that's a good segue to Simon. So Simon, again, you joined us obviously on the first session, but it'd be great for our viewers just to remind them who you are, what you do, and what brought you here.
Thanks, Kath. It's so lovely to be back. Listen, I'm 53. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old and one on the way. I started life as an entrepreneur. Everything I touched turned to gold for 12 years, and then I lost everything I had, and I had a lot. Offices in London, Vancouver, Monaco, Sydney, New York. And I spent the next 10 years in a sense of contribution and service. I went into working inside NGOs and development organizations, and actually out in communities, living remotely. That was a really interesting paradox, I think, in my life, in the relationship with material things. I earned in the first year after I lost everything, I earned in a year what I used to pay myself in a week, and yet I had the most extraordinary year. And that was puzzling. And in the last 10 years, I've been fortunate enough to work with senior leaders around the world, taking them away on experiential journeys to challenge the existing mindset, to think about how we can build wise, compassionate leadership. In that process of observing people, observing the challenges that we have to meet, I also developed a practice in meditation. It came from some time in India, and I found it incredibly helpful for myself. And in that moment of meditation, Kath, a few years ago, I had a question that kept coming up. How does consciousness, energy, and technology come together to create tipping points for change? And that's actually the origins of Sarsen. So for the last 4 years, we've been exploring that and trying to find different ways that we can all connect into something that makes us feel more connected as a human being, and how to build a practice around that. And that's broadly what
Brilliant.
we're about.
Thanks, Simon. Well, we'll definitely be talking more about that in a minute, and exploring where technology makes human connection. So thank you. Patrick, it's lovely that you could join us today. Would you like to give us a bit of your background and what brought you to Crete?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kath. Afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Johnson, and I'm the Director of Service Operations and Transformation here at Cooth. Cooth, for those of you who don't know, we'll talk a little bit more shortly, but we are a digital mental health platform available to all CMI members and the largest digital mental health service here in the UK. My background is a wavy one. I love the way that we've had our other panelists describe theirs. In that mine, I started out with a PhD in psychological medicine and psychiatry, working predominantly with adults with autism and neurodevelopmental difficulties and conditions. Worked for the NHS for a number of years, did lots of fun research, thinking about brains and genetics and the behavior that we see and what relates and links all those things together, before moving into education, both in the third level, primary, secondary, special educational needs coordinator, and then into the charity sector. So I most recently worked for children's mental health charity called Place to Be, that provides in-school mental health services at that earliest point of intervention, and have come across now to think about how we can bring that to scale across the UK and potentially further. And for me, why is the earliest time point that we can intervene to support young people, to give them the language, the knowledge, the skills, but also the advocacy to be able to ask for help, for me is a really important component. So how is it that we as managers, as individuals, can help influence that ecosystem to really allow and to foster that place where we feel safe to ask for support and to put our hand up is a hugely important thing for me.
Thank you for that, Patrick. And we've got lots of questions from the last 3 panel events that we've had today into the 4th today. But before we go to some of those, we've got some hellos in our comments box. So hello from Janet, Eswar, Tahir. So welcome everybody that's joining us today. If you do want to put any comments into the comments box, please do, or any questions or any thoughts. Alana, I'm not sure if you asked about the 2 words, if you'd like to ask our audience to do that.
An invitation just for while we're sitting here together, if you want to, I know we're the ones on screen, but we also hope it's kind of interactive today. So it's an opportunity for you to check in however you are. even if those two words are completely opposite, because often we can be feeling many things at the same time and we think we kind of have to be one or the other, but actually many things can be happening. So if you'd like to check in with 2 words or more of how you are in this moment, that would be wonderful, and you can do that anytime. For example, I feel very peaceful and excited both at the same time. That's how I am. So the comment box is open for everybody whenever you'd like to check in.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alana. Thank you. So sort of exploring a little bit more about well-being in general. It's a very broad term. It'd be great just to get each of your definition really about what you can consider to be well-being. I'll start with Patrick. Over to you, Patrick. How would you describe well-being?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this earlier, and that well-being for all of us will have different meanings. And actually, it's one of the most important things that I talk about frequently, about the language that we use. So, for example, when we talk about mental health, what do we mean by mental health? Because we all have mental health, but sometimes the thought around mental health is when things go wrong and we start to think about the negatives. But actually, I have positive mental health in the same way that I have positive physical health. So for me, it's not about well-being is not about one thing. It's about both physical and mental. So my physical well-being and my mental well-being. It's about the feeling that I've got, and the way that Lana's just asked us, how are we feeling today? So that feeling that we've got, my ability to cope with daily life, or what feels possible in that moment for me, that's my well-being. And my good mental well-being doesn't just mean that I'm always happy. Believe me, I'm not always happy. That's not good mental well-being, or the inability, or how I'm not unaffected by changes in my environment, and the fact that we've seen so much change in our environment and continue to see it in the days that we're in currently. And poor mental well-being can make it much more difficult to cope with or to engage with that daily life. So for me, it's about that feeling, coping with daily life, and what feels possible in the moment that I'm in. That would be my definition.
Thanks, Patrick. Alana?
I love that, Patrick. It's so beautifully put. I'm excited to hear Simon's as well. And Catherine, I just want to honor your heartbreak and gratitude. Thank you for checking in. Because I resonate with everything Patrick said, I'm just gonna share a slightly different one. I imagine when I talk about my own well-being, or when I work with kind of leaders around the world, I imagine as if they are a being. And what is the quality of their beingness? And so if I sit really still with myself, what is the quality of my being, and is it well? And that's how I check, is it really disturbed? Am I stuck in very, very panicked, fearful thoughts? Am I in huge amounts of physical resistance and pain? And so I really, my way to always check with somebody on how is their well-being is I get them to sit with their own being, their own humanness. So that's one of the definitions I love. Well-being is your being actually well.
And this is probably an entire series in its own right, but how do you find your humanness? I mean,
yes, let's spend the rest of our lives finding out. It's a great question, Kath. I'm tempted. Should I answer that? I'm tempted to hear. I wonder if Simon's definition might answer that as well.
For me, I look at well-being and sometimes have this image of a table with 4 legs. And Patrick's spoken about a couple of those legs, the physical and the mental. And for me, there are a couple of other legs that I've put on that table, being emotional and the sort of spiritual, my sense of purpose and connection into why I'm here. And for me, if those 4 legs are of similar size and structure and form, my table's flat, and therefore things don't roll off it. But if one of them is out, or 2 out of kilter, I'm not eating so well, or I'm not taking exercise, or I'm mentally quite distracted and not stimulated, or emotionally caught, then actually things fall apart. I tell my well-being is not in a good place. So I often have this image and that metaphor of those legs on the table to guide me to where I need to pay attention to try and create the stability and build off it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Again, sort of within the world of work, we often talk about life being like a pie chart. And each slice of it, you're trying to keep it all going, and you've got to think about all the different slices, not just one piece. So, thank you for that, Simon. So, moving on from that, how do we detect if we're not well? So, Patrick, you spoke about there not being not being black and white, it's very much a spectrum. But how do we know in ourselves if our well-being is off kilter and we're not getting that table flat?
Would you like me to start, Kath? Kind of my thoughts and views. Simon gave us a really great analogy there in that thought process and starting to think about when that equilibrium is not being met, that balance in the table has not been met. And dependent on individuals and dependent on organizations, there are different ways that we can look at well-being. So there are some organizations who will employ a series of questionnaires or surveys amongst individuals. So at Cooth, for example, we've got a flourishing survey that we have where we look at a range of different factors that feed in. So to Simon's point, we talk about 4, but we know there are even more factors that we might combine together when we look at an individual's well-being. So there are different ways that we can quantitatively look at well-being, but there are also really importantly ways that we will qualitatively look at that balance. And I think it really is interesting depending upon who we are and what it is we're looking at. So for example, if I'm a manager and I'm looking after my team, I might start to think about that more holistic approach across my team, start to employ different surveys or different approaches. They don't need to be formal or structured surveys. There might even just be time and space to hear from individuals. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to that manager-employee relationship or team member relationship, there might be more qualitative ways that we will start to think about an individual's well-being. And then importantly, self, which I'm sure we'll speak lots about. For me, that's the key component, because in all of this, if we can think about our own well-being, we can then start to think about the others that are around us.
Well, that kind of sort of nicely leads in really to think about within the world of work. So the role of the line manager is changing all of the time, isn't it? So again, Patrick, what would you say would be the role of the line manager in managing their team's well-being?
Yeah, and it's become a hugely, and rightly, a really important component in recent times. Previously, when we were all more office-based and we were physically beside each other and meeting each other at the coffee station or the water cooler, we were able to see a person in a much more holistic approach in that 360. Where today, because most of us are working in this more blended approach where we've got some online presence and some physical presence, it has made the world around well-being be much more, we've become more acutely aware of it. So in terms of the approaches that we'd be thinking about that employee, for me, a big phrase that we talk about a lot at the minute is around creating psychological safety. So being able to create the space for an individual to bring their whole self. And that has been hard at times, on a screen. We can become distracted by multiple things in our home life. But a couple of us were talking earlier about the positives that we can take from that remote interaction that we're having with each other. So I was explaining to Simon and Ilona earlier how we've got to learn much more about each other. So for example, we've been able to learn about, I think we've talked about animals lots today on our chats that we've had. We've talked about books. I can hear a dog scratching at the door right now. So we've learned a lot more about each other by being present in the way that we have to be or can be. But for me, in that relationship between line manager and team member, it really is important around how we're creating that space to be open, that space, that psychologically safe space to allow an individual, a team member, to bring themselves, to bring their concerns and to feel heard and listened to. And that's not easy for us to do, particularly in this ever-changing world, but they're the kind of key components that we'd be thinking through.
And do you sometimes find there might be a conflict between the sort of role of the line manager managing performance, so managing to get outputs and results within certain timeframes, and also creating that space? Does that come through to you sometimes?
Absolutely, and I think a manager is a tough role. It's a role that we've got to balance many components. We're managing performance that you've just said, Kath, in terms of that output or targets that we might have. We're also managing the individuals who are delivering it, thinking about not only their well-being, where they're at, but also thinking about where it is that they might want to get to in their development. It's a tricky role. And sometimes we forget as managers the impact it can have on us, and that we can sometimes be so absorbed in thinking about our team members and the performance and where we want to get to and how to support them, that we sometimes forget about the importance of ourselves. In my career to date, I've worked in education for a large number of years, and teachers are a really great example where they will always run to support the student. They'll always be thinking about the well-being of the student, the pastoral needs, the developmental needs of the student. But sometimes teachers can be really, the last person that they'll think about is their own personal well-being. And that sometimes can be to their detriment. And we see a really similar transition in management, in good managers, who it's that balance that we've got to try and bring in. So it's not easy. We've got to think about that performance, why it is that we're there with our team members. But if we have team members who are able to flourish in their roles, the output can be even bigger.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And in terms of, we had a question, I think it's probably from episode 2 actually, from Denise around, what are there any sort of practical bits of guidance you could give to a manager to say, right, this is where you start, this is the sort of thing that you could do. And again, I know sort of Ilana and Simon, sort of some of the practices that you've been teaching us in the course of this series are short, sweet, they can make a quick difference, can't they? It can get you into a different phase. But what would your advice be to a line manager saying, that where do I start here?
I think that piece that Scilla spoke to in the 3rd session, I think it was, where she talked about connection, not correction. I think if we find ourselves finding a way of connecting to each other, then we can explore and support. But if we go into correction, just as in a way you could describe it as the golden rule, if we do unto others as we expect to be done to ourselves, it will make a big difference in life. So connection, not correction, and really think hard about how you would be in the shoes of the other. Those 2 things I feel are a great start point and a practical thing that we can do very quickly.
And I'll just add to that as well. And Simon is magnificent in this. I hope it's okay to say that, which is we have this magical tool with us all the time, which is kind of how contagious our own energy is. And so when a manager is really stressed and their nervous system is kind of on high alert, that's contagious to everyone they're working with. And that naturally brings the level of stress up to everybody. And so if managers or whoever, if you're working with anybody, if you can learn to regulate your own nervous system, that has an immediate effect on the people you're working with, because it immediately relaxes their nervous systems. So things like breathing, meditation, listening, nature, play, all of the things that kind of Sarsen's working with, those are these kind of quick, they really feel like magic ways to settle our nervous system. And that just kind of, it not only soothes our own, but it kind of affects everything we touch. So that's always my first place to start, is what is the quality of energy in your own nervous system, and how do you kind of come back to yourself?
And I mean, we've done some breathing exercises, obviously, during the course of the last few events. But are there any others you would recommend to people, or what would be the easiest one, I suppose, to start with?
Honestly, I mean, I'd love to hear the others' answers. There's so many. Just taking a deep breath. The simple trick to remember is if your exhale is longer than your inhale. That's just a really good straight off the bat. So if you're taking a breath in, just slow down your exhale. And as soon as you slow down your exhale, your nervous system knows to start settling. So that's just a quick, easy, direct one. There's something called the 4-7-8. So that's an inhale of 4, a hold for 7, an exhale of 8. There's obviously box breathing. I recommend everyone looking up the Wim Hof stuff. Just taking a moment of stillness. Yeah, Simon, I saw you jumping in as well.
I was just thinking to build on that, Ilana, that you can't be anything other than present when you breathe. You cannot be in the future or the past. You can't be in rumination. You can't be in worry. So if you can connect your breath and then follow whatever the wonderful examples Ilana gave and more, you're present. And if you're present, you're much more available in relationship to the other. So the breath is an amazing gift to help us become present.
And it's free, and everybody does it.
I think
we all have this thing.
I'm not sure I read somewhere, but apparently we take 27,000 breaths a day. Was that on one of the videos?
That's right. I think Richie was telling us that, wasn't he? Exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, again, totally unconsciously, and you don't realise how small adjustments can make a difference in how your body feels, I suppose. But so that probably links on to another question, actually, probably again for you, Simon. Around, there are some people that find sometimes the language involved in some of these practices quite difficult, quite alien to what they're used to. Particularly if it goes into the realms of spiritual, that can be very uncomfortable for people. How do you sort of advise people to get beyond that?
I think we all have a different connection in life. I think there's two sides to that coin, Kath. The first I'd say is if you ever feel resistance in something, that's quite an interesting thing in itself. And it's worth exploring. Why am I resisting this? What is getting in the way here? What is coming up for me that I'm not either prepared to process, or there's a stuckness in me? So that in itself is a really good signpost. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Particularly if you have friends who don't show the same resistance to something that's in front of them. It's like, oh, my mate Bob, he's really loving this. Well, why can't I connect to it? And that's a really healthy reflection and conversation. I think the other side of that coin, Kath, when we talk about spirituality, for me, it's around just a question of how we connect into who we are and what we want to do in the world. Kind of what is our sense of purpose and our why? Because I think if we can explore our why, and it could be about being a better husband, a better dad, it could be about living with the family, it could be about how I contribute in my work. But if we can find that why and really just begin to allow it to grow, for me, that takes us into lovely directions of travel. So purpose for me is another way of thinking about it without getting caught up in the language of spirituality.
Well, on the note of language, we did have a question earlier on from Bill asking, could we define the difference between consciousness and awareness?
I think that's been a question, Bill, for thousands of years.
Since the beginning of time.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll give you a stab, Bill. My reflection today, as you asked that, Kath, I think consciousness for me is the totality of my lived experience, my five senses, and anything beyond that. That's how I say whatever I see and I'm living now is my consciousness. And awareness for me is like the door that opens to my consciousness. So if I'm not aware, I don't notice it. I am therefore unconscious. That's how I would see that. And just in this moment, as you asked.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Moving back into sort of, again, the workplace again. Patrick, from a Kooth perspective, I know you can't obviously go into specific cases or things that are shared in confidence, but are you seeing changes in the sorts of things people are coming forward with and sort of just general trends that are happening?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the beauties of Kooth is that we're able to provide and gather lots and lots of data. And as a data absolute geek, I love to be able to review what we're seeing coming through for us. It has been a really interesting time. So one of our last published reports was back in May 21. So in the thick of, 1 year into a pandemic and where we're seeing changes. And when we look at our adult population, we absolutely were seeing changes in the severity of need that was coming across from those individuals. We've seen increases in, challenge around mood. We've seen increased presentation around self-harm. We've seen increased presentation around anxiety, but also other components that I think are really important for us to bear in mind, particularly when we're thinking about our teams that we're supporting. So things like lots of people were telling us that their inability to access or engage with kind of leisure activities, things that bring people happiness, that bring that kind of relaxing moment, that kind of switch off, because we had a period of time where we weren't able to connect with others, where we weren't able to do what it was that we do to make us feel happy and to relax and to switch from work. And also we saw lots of presentation around maintaining close relationships with others being difficult. And again, part that's just the physicality of the fact that we were removed and detached from people. But we were able to see lots of people reporting to us, both children and young people in our CYP service, as well as in our adult services, difficulties around family relationships. Family relationships for lots of us have been challenging in recent times, either through loved ones being lost and or through relationships just breaking down for a whole host of different reasons. And in the opposite to that, we've seen, or complementary to it even, we've seen lots of people talk to us about loneliness, the lack of feeling connected to, or that loss of connection to individuals. And from a behavioral point of view, that's resulted in something Simon actually mentioned earlier. Sleep disturbance has been a real issue, and it's been reported not just here at Kooth. We're seeing it across multiple data sets in the UK, that sleep disturbances for a large number of individuals has been a real presentation. So we have seen changes. They're the kind of current areas. There are fluctuations. But I think the beauty of what we can see here at Kooth is that we can provide alternative ways for people to engage with and to seek support from us, because we know that one size won't fit all, and that not everybody's coming with the same challenge that they're exploring or feeling at that time point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we actually, on that note, we had one of our audience members who submitted a question on a couple of occasions, actually, really asking for help. So they're struggling at work, they're struggling with their line manager, they can't seem to get any support from the HR function, and they're basically saying, what can I do? Where can I go? So in that sort of situation, what resources are available to people?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the individual is a CMI member, we would absolutely suggest reaching out to us via Kooth, not for that support around how to interact with the line manager, but more about thinking of themselves, because that's a stressful situation, and going into work and all the things that we're feeling when we get into that situation will have impact on our ability to cope with and or to deal with the situations that we're experiencing. So if they are a CMI member, we absolutely would love to be able to support in terms of how to process some of that, some of the emotion that they're feeling with it, how to, on our platform, we can also pose questions to each other, to fellow peers to engage with, and that therapeutic writing that some of us were talking about today is hugely important. For example, journaling. Journaling is a really great way, and we've seen an increase in people journaling, particularly during COVID lockdowns. And that therapeutic process of actually writing and documenting can be hugely helpful. And that's something that we can actually do, individuals can do here on the Kooth site. So I think for us, that would be a really practical way in which somebody could engage with, particularly thinking about themselves rather than that direct line manager to team member relationship.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. And I think, again, I mean, we've touched on it a few times, but we're all living in very strange times, aren't we? And the course of the last 2 years, unprecedented really for all of us. And then, just last week, what's happening in Ukraine, it impacts all of us, doesn't it? I mean, message there from Eswar about concerned about the citizens in Ukraine. I'm sure we can all share that. And you kind of feel a bit helpless because you see these things unrolling on TV and it builds up inside you, doesn't it? These levels of angst going on. So again, sort of Simon and Lana, have you got any ideas for how we can sort of just help to get rid of that sort of almost subconscious stress?
I'm going to bold an answer, Kath. Simon might have something very different to say. I'm probably more in the welcome the what you're feeling instead of avoid what you're feeling department. So the more I know for myself, if I notice my anxiety arising, I imagine like there's a little girl who's scared. And how would I sit with a scared little girl? I wouldn't be like, stop screaming at me. You're really annoying. I'd kind of hold her and tell her that I love her and I'm with her and I've kind of got her. And so when I have that level of fear and anxiety arising, I welcome it and I sit with it and I listen to it, but without kind of listening to it in a way that's like, oh, let's get really, really worked up, but kind of actually, it's okay. This is a scary time. It's okay to be scared. This is an unknown time. It's okay to feel anxious, and kind of self-soothe in that way. And I think I think Patrick touched on this as well. My question for this always comes back to, and how do you speak to yourself when no one else is listening? What is your relationship with yourself? And are you friends with yourself? Are you at peace with yourself? Are you kind to yourself? Are you respectful? Because then every action you do in your life, all of your leadership choices, the way you interact with what's going on in the world is coming from a place of profound, deep love here. And so that overflows, where if it's from a place of profound fear, that's coming, you're not thinking in the same form of clarity. So that's my slightly unusual answer. Simon, what would you say?
I think I see the infinity symbol as you speak, Lana, and noticing that one half of it is around fears and around the tragedy of what we're seeing in life. And we connect that because it's very real and we can't escape that. But there's another half, another side to us, which is about our relationships here, our families and loved ones. And so connecting to both gives me a sense of balance. It doesn't deny that that's there, and it really honors what's happening, but it still allows me to show up and try and be the best version of me in this moment here. So I often feel about that infinity, tying the things together. I feel that helps me enormously.
And Patrick, any advice on this one for how we manage our own feelings?
Yeah, and change is inevitable, and it's one of the most difficult things to manage as an individual, as a manager, as an organization. But it's one of the most certain things that's going to happen in life. Change is going to happen. And I think for me, the key is how we, Alana, you talked that brilliant piece earlier around how we as individuals process and manage, and that spilling. Sometimes we talk about the spilling that we can have and the impact that that can have on others. And we see that in multiple areas of life, be that work, home as well. When it comes to thinking about, many young people right now are probably looking to parents going, what is happening in the world? Yet again, we're hearing lots of really scary and tragic situations. We had this 2 years ago when we started to move into that lockdown period. And now for many young people reading the news and seeing, a world in conflict is really challenging. So how we are, all the points that we've heard from Alana and Simon about how we can be present in ourselves and think about the now and the how is hugely, hugely important, because we influence so many people on a daily basis, sometimes without realizing that we're having that kind of impact that we are having. So I think for me, that's the kind of key component that I'm be mindful of. But we have to also hold on to that change is inevitable, that it is going to happen, and we have to accept the change. So Simon, you were doing this and I was just like following your eye and with my eyes there thinking, yeah, that is exactly what it is. There are cycles that we will go through. And in organizations, we talk about change management. It's like it's a fluid term that we throw out there on a very, very regular basis. And we know that people approach change in different ways, and the curves that we go through can be really challenging for some individuals. And actually, Kath, we're doing a piece with CMI in the weeks ahead, a masterclass that's coming up in a couple of weeks' time here at Cooth and CMI, to look at how is it that we can manage change as individuals and as organizations, because I don't think we've all mastered it yet, and there is no mastering because it is ever changing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we'll definitely make sure that the links to that masterclass go out so everyone that's interested can access that. And I think it sounds like a great program for line managers again, so they can help their teams. Probably not a great analogy, but I always think about, when you're learning to do a dangerous sport, skiing or surfing or something like that, if you tense up, it really hurts when you hit the deck or you hit the wave or whatever it might be, and the more relaxed you are, the less painful it is. And I always kind of think about that, just trying to relax into whatever that situation might be. So yeah, I'm a sporty person, so I always use those sort of experiences in life of where things have hurt and you brush yourself off and get on, and how do you limit the pain. So in terms of the audience, so Janet on a specific note here, she's saying she struggles to switch off completely in order to meditate. So I'm not sure if that's like quietening the mind, or how basically she can find that space. What are the tips from the panel? So how can you get into the right frame of mind for meditation?
Happy to jump in and just have a couple of thoughts for you, Janet. Firstly, meditation isn't for everyone. So if it doesn't work, don't feel that you're doing it badly or that there's something wrong with you. There's many other ways of finding that sense of stillness and space within. So, and that can be literally walking in nature and standing on a beach and looking out to sea, or it could be playing some music or dancing or singing in a choir. There's lots of ways of finding that. But meditation is a help, certainly for many people have found that. I would say that a number of ways in that there is sometimes doing it with other people is helpful. You're actually in a shared experience rather than being on your own. Creating a sort of ritual of something you do every day at the same time, because that way it may be difficult to begin with, but if you're structured about it and you'll just sort of hold yourself to account for a few weeks, it begins to get a little bit easier. Notice that everyone gets on the horse and falls off and gets on the horse and falls off. We're all in the same place. And don't do it for too long to begin with. Don't overstretch it. Just start little bite-sized pieces and then build up. Hopefully some of those things could be useful at this stage, Janet.
Yeah. And are there places that you would all advise to go seek useful information? Because again, we all know about the sort of barrage of false truths on the internet and all that kind of thing. So, but are there sort of certain experts, or are there certain sites that you would say, look, if you're interested in meditation, you're interested in breathing, you're interested in just finding out more about consciousness, awareness, and so on, where would you advise people to go find information?
One of the, I'll probably have a book here somewhere. One of the first people I was aware of in the UK doing mindfulness, which obviously is a form of meditation, was a guy called Mark Williams from Oxford University, and he created I think it's the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. Patrick, you probably know better than I do the name, but Mark is I think I've met him, and I have lots of friends who are very related to him in this space, and I think what they've created there is a very practical, sensible, well-considered program with lots of data and research attached to it. And so much so as we know that NICE, the commissioning body in the UK here for medication, is now using mindfulness in people's lives rather than medication for people suffering from sort of chronic depression. So it's got a real place in the system, and it wouldn't have been accepted without that data and without that research behind it. So there's real validity. But someone like the Oxford Mindfulness Centre could be a place to begin to explore if people were interested.
Mm-hmm. Any other top tips from the panel of places to go look for interesting insights?
From a children and young people's point of view in our lives, I have much more expertise there. There are, as Simon said, there's some really great resources available out there. So if you are thinking about, particularly with younger people, there's mindfulness in schools programs that come out of Oxford, and the Just Be programs, but they've got really relatable adult resources as well that are available. So having a look there. NHS in recent years has put together a really great directory of resources. And I think, Kathy, you raised a really important point around there is a lot of paper out there, there's a lot of type out there, and it's kind of where do you get that reliable resource? So that's always for the novice in us. That's a really good place to start. Again, if you are accessing Cuth, we've got lots of resources online that are either created by us as individuals, by our practitioners and our teams, or actually one of the brilliant things is that we have individuals who will contribute articles to the site. So they might be talking, for example, about a recent experience that they've been through that we pre-moderate, and then it's published, and individuals can interact with that, because that connection, that connectedness that we talked about right at the start for individuals is a really great way of sharing and realizing sometimes that you are not the only person who's feeling that. So Janet, you give that example earlier of, you're not able to completely switch off in order to meditate. I'm the other person who is like that. And Simon absolutely hit the nail on the head there. For me, it's that I've tried it. It's not for me in the way that we were talking about earlier, but Alona just did that brilliant piece earlier where she said, just stop and think and breathe. And sometimes for me, that's all I need, is to take that space out, to just take that deep inhalation and exhalation is really important for me in my life.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I mean, and again, I think I've said this all the way through. For me, things like the breathing exercises, great. You can put them in at the start of a meeting, halfway through, the end. It just provides that little bit of space, doesn't it? Just to let everything just, filter through. Very good. We had a question from Edgar. Oh, sorry, Simon. Did you have something else to say?
I was thinking about that lovely man, Mac McCartney, who we listened to a little earlier on today, and his connection with our own insecurities and how we affect, and the ripple of our effect in life. But another side to Mac's gift, I think, is his relationship with gratitude. How he tries to bring that into his life each day. And I think we all have a chance to do that. If we can find something we're grateful for and try and have a way of identifying with it, and then each day think about that, whether it's the same thing, something different. I noticed for me that's a meditative form in itself, and it's really a gift, and change happens with that sort of action, and it's such a small little bite-sized piece to do. So I would always recommend, if you find yourself stuck or a bit lost in this place, just go back to the basics, of which gratitude is definitely one.
Thank you. Edgar has asked us, what's the impact of actually experiencing and overcoming adversity? So actually in those sort of circumstances where maybe we've been helped and guided through something very difficult, does that actually help our well-being in the long term?
Help mine.
Yeah, help mine.
Okay, relevant for all of you. We've all had very big changes in our lives, and ups and downs, and all kinds of things. So, is it the kind of what makes us, I can't think of the phrase, but think about, it makes you tougher, basically.
What doesn't kill you? Exactly.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah. I listen, from I would never wish ill upon anyone, and the pain of being in these things is awful, but there does seem to be a place to the other side when you can cope with it. I was very interested that someone was talking to me recently about a book around Abraham Lincoln, and he was talking about at Lincoln's time. Most people experienced great pain earlier in life because at that stage you had someone who may have died in your life, either a child or a family relative or a friend and a parent. And so we were used to dealing with pain in a different way earlier in our lives, perhaps, than we are now. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm just interested by it, but I suppose my point I'm trying to make is that in the grief and the struggle and the hardship of life, there is great learning to strengthen us to move into the next stage of what we are. It's just hard in that moment, but it always does move through, like the seasons.
Yeah, it's that other phrase, isn't it? It's always darkest just before dawn.
Just before dawn.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So, I mean, I sort of pushed you a bit around, some people being uncomfortable with language, but the reality is, I mean, the popularity of mindfulness, meditative techniques, massively grown, hasn't it, the last few years? People's access has massively grown to this information. Again, why do you think that is? Why do you think this is sudden interest?
I think we're seeing results. The outputs and outcomes are like, wow, this works. It helps. I think the recognition of building practice, we now know, we didn't know, and Patrick, you'll be better at this time, but I understand until fairly recently, certainly in our generation, we thought a leopard couldn't change his spots, and we were all just stuck in the way that we are. And actually, I recognize that's not true. Through the neuroplasticity of our own brain, we can change, and we can choose to let go of patterns that aren't serving and build new patterns. But it requires a degree of practice. And Kath, to what you were talking about before, for me, the beauty here is building a practice of something, whatever it is that works for you. Maybe meditation, maybe something completely different. But the regular repeated use of that seems to help people move into a different direction of travel. And I think that's now being shown in all the data that comes out around mindfulness and meditation as a particular aspect of that.
And do you think this can help us to unlock things we didn't think were possible? Because again, I have been watching Wim Hof. We mentioned it before at the beginning, Alana, but he's becoming a huge celebrity, isn't he? And he seems to be doing things that are physically impossible. So, I mean, is it real, or is he just showing us again that there's just more to us than we can possibly imagine?
I mean, I think it's absolutely the latter. I think he's such a delightful, unexpected celebrity. It's like this he's so true to himself, but because he's showing us something that we all know is difficult. It's difficult to get into ice cold water. We don't want to do it. And here he is getting everyday people to do it and have ice cold showers. And it's like, oh, there's something happening here. And he's clearly doing something. He's not, giving them some kind of medication so they don't feel it. He's teaching them something and now they're able to do something. So there's something very compelling about that. And he represents just one example of that. So all of these doorways and pathways open up these capacities that are just waiting for us. And for me, it's like this goodie box of things and capacities that we've all got access to, and it's a bit uncomfortable for a little while. And so for me, there's something about can you welcome the uncomfortable? Can you be comfortable in the discomfort of something new? For anyone who's tried yoga, I remember my first yoga class was like, God, what is this? And now it's like, that's a joyful place. And just to Janet's question, the first time I sat quietly for 30 seconds, I thought I was going to lose my mind. I had no idea what was going on, what people were doing. My inner voice was on a rampage, screaming, what a load of nonsense. And now give me 2 weeks in a silent retreat and I'm happy as anything. And it's like, but I remember that first 30 seconds, I was like a crazy person. Nobody in that room would ever have thought that that's what was going to become my life's work. And it was uncomfortable because one has to hear oneself. And there's a fantastic Rumi quote that's something, I'm going to ruin this, but something along the lines of, why are we so afraid of silence? If we spiral into its void, 1,000 voices will thunder messages we long to hear. And my sense is that within us, we have our own answers, our own way of being, our own knowledge, that we haven't necessarily sat still long enough to listen, and they can be quite confronting. And so then of course we must avoid that, because then we'll have to listen to ourselves, and then we'll have to act on what we know to be true. And that can be really hard. And so I kind of want to take my hat off to Janet for even asking, because it is brave to try and experiment. And the one answer to Janet I wanted to say was, the thing that really helped me was just repeating a small phrase over and over and over again occupies the mind, and allows you to meditate. You can repeat anything. There's a fantastic app called One Giant Mind, and it just gives you one tiny sound to repeat over and over again, and it occupies the noisy mind and lets you meditate. It's like you're meditating on the side whilst your thinking mind is carrying on to think. And that for me has been an amazing way in, like tricks the mind. So that'd be my tip there. I don't know if that answered your question, Kath.
Well, I'm sure that resonates with a lot of us, myself included. And I think, again, in the world of work, we're always so busy and everything's so task focused that, just having something which is simple that can help you break in and listen to the voices is very, very helpful indeed. We've only got a few minutes left, and we weren't planning on doing this, but I think it'd be lovely to close with a breathing exercise, actually, while we say goodbye to everybody. So if that's okay with you, Alana, I'm going to ask you to close us out. So before we do, I just want to take a moment to say thank you very much to Alana, Simon, Patrick. Jesse's not here today. It's been a really, really interesting series of events, and we hope to ask you all back, and Patrick too. Brilliant, lovely to hear about what we can access through Kooth. It'd be lovely to get you all back, probably later on in the year, maybe regroup, see what the year has brought us. But I just really want to say thank you all very much, and we'll do once around and then end up with Alana. But just any last few words of advice for our listeners today would be fantastic. So over to you, Simon.
I think we live in a very heady world at the moment. We're all caught up in that. I think that our head is a beautiful gift, our mind, but it's not our boss or our lord or our master. I think that goes into our heart. And I just encourage us all to find a way into our heart and use the head as a guidance and as a way of delivering what our heart's telling us.
Thank you, Simon. Patrick?
I resonate with one word: kindness. Be kind to yourself, because I think sometimes we can get wrapped up in everything that's going on around us, and the must-dos and the to-do lists and the necessary needs of everybody else, but we sometimes forget to be kind to ourselves. So taking that moment, either in the stillness that we're going to have in a second, or in the noise, or in the chaos, just being kind to ourselves is hugely important.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you. Alana?
The word that came up in this one is around welcome, and welcoming parts of yourself that you don't find so easy, and welcoming others in ways that you don't find so easy. Kath, you've done an amazing job at welcoming us. And so this is kind of like an example. Imagine if I could make all parts of me feel like you've made us feel today.
Thank you.
So there's something about how do you welcome parts of yourself? Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm just going to do a little bit of house admin, and I'm going to hand back to you, Alana, just to close us out with a final breathing exercise, if that's okay. So really, just everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. Don't forget, if you're a member of CMI, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you'll find lots of exclusive practical development resources to help. And as we mentioned all the way through this, Patrick's represented Kooth brilliantly today, and that mental health service is available to you. If you're not a member or subscriber, you can join our community via that link, and that gives you full access to our Management Direct portal, and you can sign up for a free CMI newsletter for all the trends and tips for managers and leaders. And please do let us know about your thoughts on this event and the wellbeing series in the feedback form. So finally, thank you very much for joining us, and I'm going to hand you to Alana to help give us a final grounding exercise.
Thank you, Kath, and also Natasha, who's in the background. You've done an amazing job and you're fantastic. All right, so we're going to do something called 4-7-8. So it's an inhale of 4, a hold for 7, and an exhale of 8. That's all you need to do. I'll count you. So wherever you are, you can just take a nice deep breath in and let it all go. And then inhale through your nose for 2, 3, 4. Hold lightly. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale slowly. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if you'd like to close out just by thinking of somebody that you are so grateful for in this moment, and have that feeling in your heart. So whether it's a loved one, a pet, a piece of work, whatever it is, just something that you are so grateful for. And just take one deep breath into that feeling in your heart. And let it all go. Have a wonderful rest of your evening or day, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.